Welcome, everyone, to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, this conversation circle put on by Still and Moving Center every Saturday. And to begin, we usually start by having a reading from the back of the Still and Moving Center Almanac, which has to do with our theme for the year, that theme for the year being light on the path. And so Jenny Bishop is kind enough to read that back cover for us.
Growing luminous. On the mystic path, we create our own light. And at first we struggle blind and baffled, seeing nothing, hearing nothing, unable to think, unable to imagine. We seem deserted by dream, vision, or inspiration, and our meditation barren altogether. But let us persist through weeks or months, and sooner or later that stupor disappears. Our faculties readjust themselves and do the work we will them to do. Never did they do their work so well. The dark caverns of the brain begin to grow luminous. We are creating our own light. George William Russell.
Thank you ever so much. Well, friends, our theme this Saturday is trusteeship. This follows the week of Gandhiji's birthday, which was on October 2nd, and it precedes the birthday of B.P. Wadia, who was a theosophist from India. He was also a labor activist. His birthday was in 1881. And both of these two wonderful Indian luminaries and leaders, Gandhiji and B.P. Wadia, were very much proponents of this idea of trusteeship. We're very fortunate to have Maurice Bishop with us, who has spoken on a number of occasions here at the Still Moving Center Gems from the Wisdom Traditions Circle. And he has experience as a professor, and also he is a very active member. In fact, he's the president currently of the Institute of World Culture in Santa Barbara. He also has experience in the field of, I'm going to have to ask him, public
administration.
Public administration, which I actually think is somehow related to this topic, to tell you the truth. So I'm going to, without further ado, pass it over to Maurice for our topic of trusteeship.
Well, thank you, Renee, and welcome everyone. I'm glad to be here and welcome all of you from wherever you are around the world. It's wonderful. Yes, I'm going to speak about trusteeship. There are a lot of traditions, religious and philosophical traditions that might point to trusteeship. But for our hour today, I'm going to basically confine my thoughts to the Gandhian tradition, and in particular, a pamphlet from the Institute of World Culture written by Raghavan Iyer called Gandhian Trusteeship in Theory and Practice, which is, and so we might start with this from Hermes. For any individual to be a trustee in any meaningful sense implies that he is acutely aware of the unmet needs of others and simultaneously is capable of controlling and transmuting his own appropriating tendencies. So the real quality of a trustee is to think about the common good, to think about the unmet needs of others. But at the same time, in order to be a trustee, you have to be able not so much to be acquisitive for yourself and your selfish needs, but rather to think beyond what you think you need or want and to see the unmet needs of others. Now, for Gandhi, trusteeship is not just a secular strategy, so to speak, of helping other people or of making sure that other things go right and things like that. But Gandhi had, even though he's not a logical philosopher, it's all logical in a book and all that, but his idea of trusteeship actually came out of societal strife in India, in part, and in part is related to the idea of renunciation, which is in the Bhagavad Gita. But he has his own take, so to speak, on it, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to start by taking a look then at the why trusteeship. And for Gandhi, like so many people we admire, are like bridges between heaven and earth. That they combine the spiritual and the secular. And in this case, to understand Gandhian trusteeship, or to understand most or all of Gandhi, it's not just a tactic to achieve something. Let's do this so we can be successful at that. Or let's do this because then I'll be less selfish. Let's do, but it's rather thinking through how we are manifestations of the divine. So I would just like to take the opportunity then to start with coming from above below, as they say, so you understand the why of trusteeship. What is the fundamental real law and basis behind this idea? And so Raghavanaya writes, Mahatma Gandhi held that all human beings are implicitly responsible to God, the family of man, and to themselves for their use and treatment of all goods, gifts, and talents that fall within their domain. This is so because nature and man are alike upheld, suffused, and regenerated by the divine. There is a luminous spark of divine intelligence in the motion of the atom and in the eyes of every man and woman on earth. We incarnate our divinity when we deliberately and joyously nurture our abilities and assets for the sake of the larger good. And in this sense, the finest examples of trusteeship are ones who treat all their possessions as though they were sacred or deeply precious beyond any worldly scale of valuation. Thus, it is only through daily moral choice and meritorious use of resources that we sustain our inherited or acquired entitlements. And then he goes on to contrast trusteeship with ownership. Well, one can't own something that starts and then stops, that starts and then dissolves. That's not everlasting. So in a sense, the great gifts that we've been given through our own karma and through a series of reincarnations, along with the karmic circumstances and constraints that we have and face in our own circumstances. But we've been given gifts and we've been given talents. And those are ones that we have manifested through our divine spark into our being. So we're spiritual beings that at the same time have been given so many vectors to operate on, so much intelligence, or at least potential intelligence, and so many opportunities, even if they seem very small within our karmic constraints and conditions. And this is really the setting then for being a trustee. And so when we look at such a thing, we're again going back to the quote. The question is, well, what are we here for, right? So what we're here for and what we're manifesting is to discern the unmet needs of others, while at the same time not taking too much or appropriating too much for ourselves. And of course, this may be one definition that could lead to nonviolence. As you know, Gandhi believed in truth and nonviolence. So we know all about this trusteeship because we do it naturally. So there's nothing exotic about this, really. Mothers give birth to children and they're trustees. Parents raise children, challenging as it might be, but they act with a sense of what their child's needs are, or unmet needs, if one is discerning, and at the same time putting away, at least temporarily, one's own needs for satisfaction or one's own needs for relaxation. So the idea of being a trustee is like just a natural way of being. So all Gandhi's really suggesting, as the sages intimate as well, is that we do this not simply instinctively, but we do it consciously. It's a way of living. It's not a tactic to achieve a goal, although it may have a tactic in it. But it's an overall way of living, a mental posture of being a trustee for the common good, a trustee to go beyond oneself. And to that extent, it's hard to be a trustee if you think you own something 100%. Because if you own something 100%, you're totally attached to it. You have to defend it. You have to put all of your sentience into it. So you become very circumscribed to something that's very temporary, that's not going to last anyway, even in one life, let alone the whole of one life. So the idea of ownership has with it, as Gandhi points out, a species of violence in it. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be responsible for something and that there may be some legal framework for allowing you to exercise your responsibility. For trusteeship is about responsibility, but responsibility for unmet needs and responsibility for the whole. And this is the way we incarnate our divinity from life to life, at least one way of looking at it. Well, if that's the why, so to speak, or what's behind this idea of trusteeship, then we can take a look, as the pamphlet suggests too, kind of 4 different levels of trusteeship. Gandhi came up with his idea of trusteeship partly out of societal conflict. Obviously, there are a lot of gaps all over the world and all the nations between rich and poor. And beyond just language like rich and poor, there are people that are spiritually really suffering or materially really suffering. They don't know what they're going to eat tomorrow. And yet, if we all came from the one, the universal source, the divine, and we're all part of a great universal brotherhood, then we can do something about this disparity. And trusteeship, if we take that as a way of living and a conscious way of living, we can continuously distribute wealth. Spiritual wealth means, of course, share and exemplify spiritual teachings and ideas, But in this case, probably more emphasis on continuously sharing wealth in terms of resources for people's sustenance and the planet's sustainability. And so all of us then could take a vow, if you will, or become more conscious in our trusteeship. Now, I can give you one big example is in Gandhi's successor, Vinoba Bhave, and I mention this because some people don't know about this. Vinoba Bhave was a Gandhi spiritual successor, and he was actually gentler, more gentle. But there did come a time, starting in 1951, after Gandhi's death, where something had to be done because of the tremendous disparities between rich and poor in India, and the threat of the hammer and sickle Communist Party, which may not be the same as it is today, but back in 1951, Stalin was still around, India could have faced a civil war, which is a lot of unnecessary violence internally. Because of this disparity, especially in certain states. And so Vinoba Bhave, known as a spiritual person, he went out and he decided he was going to walk India. But what he was going to do is he was going to go to the rich landowners. I think Mr. Reddy was the first. And he said, listen, I'd like to become part of your family because we're really all the family of man anyway, as you know. But I would like to personally become part of your family. But I would also like, as part of your family, and we're all part of the human family, if out of all these acres of land, you can gift some acres to your poorest peasants who are really starving and can't make it. And that's kind of what I ask you to do. After all, I'm part of your family. And starting with Mr. Reddy, over the course of 2 or 3 years, with Vinoba Bhave walking all over India, 2 million acres of land were gifted to the poorest, to the unpossessed. And not all of them we know was primary good land, et cetera, et cetera. There was always imperfections. But the fact is that this had a major impact on Indian society. And it's called the Bhudan movement, and you could read about it. Most people, it's kind of amazing that most people, at least in America, don't seem to know anything about it. But this is one example. I'm giving the more extraordinary example of what it's like to be a trustee, where he sacrificed and went out and asked others to sacrifice for the common good, for the greater good. Because we're all trustees, because we're all diffused, manifesting the divine for all of God's children, if you want to use those words. So this is one dimension of trusteeship, is a way for owners, maybe not in such dramatic fashion. The fact of the matter is this happens all the time and we don't know about it. You know, we know that there are owners of businesses who take immigrants, and after the immigrants work for a while, yes, they actually teach the immigrants how to set up their own business. They actually help finance them in some cases. That doesn't get written up in the newspaper. But they're really becoming trustees. It's something beyond their immediate family, beyond immediate family inheritance, and all that kind of thing, but actually in communities and micro communities, using their special gifts and talents, or good karma, if you will, to help others who may need to be uplifted and do this. So The idea of trusteeship in terms of society, in terms of that you don't own everything, you can give something away, whether it's your skills, your talents, your money, etc., for the greater good, is very, very common, even in the United States, but that we don't talk about it. But if we did allow more people to see that that was such an act of trusteeship, that can help change the mentality. And what it does on another level, then, on the level of psychology, is it allows us to reduce the fear that's beyond possessiveness, because everyone has fear. But it allows us to beginning to cultivate courage that can be detached from violence. Because we think violence is courage, but obviously, and we've heard many times in GEMS, that nonviolence is a courageous act. It's not whether you're willing to kill for some, are you willing to die for something? That's courage. And courage must be detached from violence, and creativity has to be dislodged from a self-protected formulation of who the elites are and who's deserving and who's not deserving. So we need new notions of creative imagination, of activity, of eros in fellowship. And we can abolish the idea of fear and failure. And everyone said, whoa, that's a big one, right? But in fact, once people start working with each other, it's just natural, as pointed out, just like parents and children, to work for the whole and to work for the greater good. And in some smaller scale societies and traditional societies, like you have, for example, in Hawaii, but all over the world, they exist. These are very common things. You don't even have to say it, because that, even though there's other kinds of corruption, et cetera, it goes on, we know, but that these are things that everyone could use common resources to uplift the whole. And the idea of being equality does not mean similarity. Equality simply means a kind of common resource where we're all working to uplift the whole and contributing what we can. This comes pretty close to a Gandhian view of socialism. But Gandhi didn't like Marxist socialists very much. I mean, I'm not talking about personalities, but ideas, because it was too centralized, forced, and too mechanical. And capitalism is exploitive. So he came up with the idea of, why can't we have trusteeship, where you don't have ownership, but you still have responsibility. And you still have constraints, and you still have moral choices and sacrifices. It's not so easy. So he would argue that this can become a whole different paradigm from fear, competition, money grubbing, and a way to get ahead and then have external social status over someone else, and power and acquisition, and then appropriating more. Because once you get going, it gets intoxicating. People want more. You hope, they've got enough. No. Karma tends to continue to come back again and come back again. So trusteeship really becomes a whole different kind of paradigm. And we can begin to see then that we can create different things that would be much better for people. And now, to give another specific example, property disparity, of course, is very much a problem with polarization and the rest of it. That is rich and poor. And a lot of it involves who owns property and who doesn't, and who can control people's rents and who doesn't. But if we had the idea of trusteeship, there is the idea of a statutory trusteeship where, and I think you know this, where you can create a whole land basis of a land trust and set up rules which would not make it amenable to the market of speculative real estate, buying and selling and all that kind of stuff. And in inner cities in America, the same could be said if one strategically buys houses on a particular few blocks and makes them into land trust, where you can make it into a rental or 99-year ownership. You can specify that it is not on the market, the real estate market. And that doesn't mean you can't sell it or set some percentage that it might go up or something like that. And you can do what you like, actually. It's pretty contractual. So this notion of trusteeship can be used as a major vehicle for social change. It does take, however, and so many spiritual teachers talk about it, H.P. Blavatsky talks about it a lot in that tradition, that it's going to take the cooperation of the rich and the poor working together, but it's not a mechanical one-for-one. Everyone gives what they can and where they can. But the important thing is that it must be thoughtful, that it can't just be a feel-good or a one-off kind of thing, but one must be thoughtful about what one can do to meet people's unmet needs and how one might use the law, even if necessary, to be able to create a more healthy common good. Now, to do this, of course, requires the other side of the picture, which is kind of working on ourselves a bit to become better trustees. We can start with the idea that, unlike the example I gave of a grandiose example with Vinoba Bhave, any person can be a trustee. Any person by degrees can think through what they have, talents, skills, money, whatever, and how it can be best used to meet unmet needs. But to do that, one has to begin to see oneself as more self-governing and more morally sensitive. It has to become a way of life. And so one has to begin to develop a firmness of resolve and a self-awareness, right? A firmness of resolve, whether it's through a vow or otherwise, that we want to live life as continuously, but not necessarily always having to act per se, as a conscious trustee for the greater good. So we must start with the basics of simplifying our own wants and identifying our true needs for ourselves. And it's very easy in a consumer culture to expand our wants all the time to not just chocolate ice cream, but wonderful lemon meringue ice cream. Oh, I'll just taste it. I'm curious. Watch what curiosity does to us, or does to me anyway, where pretty soon my desires begin to expand, whether they're wants or needs, and pretty soon I can't even tell the difference sometimes. Now, William Kwan Judge says to us as a spiritual teacher, and Gandhi, I think, would agree, that we want to start to reduce our desires. And by reducing our desires, it's easier to identify what our needs are. But to reduce our desires, we have to, at least in the language of Gandhi and in religious leaders, we have to do a conscious act of renunciation. And I'll quote from what Gandhi said about that. In a letter, The Golden Key, Socialism of My Conceptions. So this is like Gandhian socialism. The act of renunciation of everything is not merely physical renunciation, but represents a second or new birth. It is a deliberate act, not done in ignorance. It is therefore a regeneration. So renunciation is kind of a letting go of excess asking, do I really need this now? Do I have all this stuff hanging on my back? Can I let go of some of it and lighten the load? And this is something that we can discuss, but certainly simplifying our wants, identifying our needs. The other thing is to really look at our motive. Nothing's going to happen if you don't have ambition. And even the Dalai Lama says nothing's going to happen if you don't have a strong ego. Because the person with a weak ego is not going to be able to do anything anyway. But to try to purify our motives by trying to let go of the things that are self-binding and looking at a more expansive unmet needs of others for the common good. And I'll stop then in a minute. I'll just suggest that we could start with looking at our own property, use of property. We occupy it, we use it. Do we share it? Do we have to own it? Well, we might have to own it because that's the sign of the times, et cetera, but do we really need to own it? Could it be communal? Another place to start with being a trustee is the balance in your checkbook. Can you balance your checkbook? For me, I kind of intuitively balance it. And well, it works most of the time, but not all the time. But do you really get on that checkbook to really create a cycle or a rhythm of being a trustee? Because though that money is part of your gifts, part of your skills, part of your resources that for yourself, but also to uplift others. So to being responsible with your checkbook and to be attentive and mentally awake, attentive and thoughtful is very important. How to use one's time for leisure. So, we all know that there are, life may give us many choices. For many people, they have no choice. They don't have any leisure time in the world. But for some of us, we have a lot of choices and they seem to multiply all the time. Or do we use our time to work with other people to meet their unmet needs, whether it's spiritually or materially? And finally, skills. How can we use our skills not only for ourselves and for our family, but can we go beyond our family and really use our skills to help people? Now, it may not always work the way we think it's going to work, but whether it's the Heritage for Humanity. Yeah, Jimmy Carter set up, now I can't remember, Housing for Humanity, Habitat for Humanity. That's a great way of using one's skills, not for one's family, but for the greater good, to give hope, but also true sustenance to human beings. So these are micro ways that all of us then can become trustees within our own circles and more self-governing, morally sensitive. And just think if everyone thought about this rather than ownership or what they got to get or what they got to consume or what's on their checklist to do in life, et cetera, and all that. But if one actually thought about being trustees like so many of our indigenous peoples knew and practiced in their cultures, so much more trust and benevolence and community would recur. We've become more thoughtful and more grateful. So with that, I'll stop and let us go into a discussion on the idea of trusteeship.
Gosh, thanks so much, Maurice. You just gave us a wonderful platform, I feel like, for taking off, a very stable base, explaining to us at a very deep level where the idea of trusteeship came from Gandhi, and not only from the circumstances that he saw in India of great inequities and people working so hard who were landless, but also from his view of what it means to be a human being.
Yeah.
And in of itself means to take some responsibility for the greater whole, because we're all part of the divine. So that
Yeah.
was really great opening for us, and then everything from there on downward
Yeah.
unfolded. I do want to especially introduce Prakash Tyagi. He is the head of the Gandhian nonprofit called Gravis, which is in northern India and Rajasthan. And it is the nonprofit that our daughter, Sandhya, worked at, I don't know, 12 or 15 years ago. And that's how she came to know Prakash and his mother, who's no longer with us, Sasaj. And they are living embodiments of this idea of trusteeship, of leading their lives for the sake of the greater good, finding ways to use all of their time and resources that they possibly can to meet the unmet needs of others, as you mentioned, Maurice. I'm not sure whether Prakash, to you or your parents got to meet Vinoba Bhave, who did that land drive to collect all that land on behalf of landless impoverished. But we'd certainly love to hear any thoughts you have on this whole concept.
Thank you, Renée. Greetings, everyone, from a very early morning, India. I enjoyed your talk, enlightening talk, Maurice, and a lot
Thank
of
you.
things that I picked up, which are very common in our understanding of trusteeship and the way you presented. I think the unmet needs that you talked about is a very important piece, and that is crucial towards developing the culture of trusteeship. And the unmet needs are oftentimes related to poverty, which is, of course, on a very great level in our community in India, but of course is widespread across the world. And if poverty has to be alleviated, if people have to come out of poverty's vicious cycle, then trusteeship becomes an important need. It's not only about being responsible, it's not about being accountable, it's about being kind. It's about remembering that when people come out of poverty, they need help. And those who have come out of poverty in the past, at some point in time, they have always been helped, most of the people. People have abilities, people have talents, but sheer ability, sheer talent does not work alone when people have to come out of the poverty. If the vicious cycle of poverty has to be broken, help is required. And those who have been helped in the past, people like me and others, they must have the sense of responsibility that they need to continue the cycle of helping others forward. With this in mind, we continue doing our work on trusteeship, on reaching out to the needy communities in our society. And I think poverty, which is a kind of a social disease with manifestations of hunger and illiteracy and poor health, it's a social disease which is required to be eliminated from everyone's standpoint. In a community, in a neighborhood, in a society, if there is some poverty, it cannot be easy for anyone living in that society, because when we talk of spiritual health and mental health, we cannot be at peace if there are people with poverty living with needs in these societies, in these communities. So unmet needs is a very important concept for us as well, and we relate to it very, very deeply, reaching out to people in need. Just one more thing about Gandhi's understanding of inequality and of discrimination and of injustice. I think most people know a lot about Gandhi, but some people may not know that Gandhi grew up in a very wealthy family. He was not from an ordinary economic background. So from the very early childhood, the inequality, the injustice that he saw in comparison to others in the society, he kind of understood the difference that life can make to people's future, to people's upbringing, and that was a seed which was sown in his life to fight against inequality and against injustice. And to Renee's question, Vinoba Bhave was a great philosopher, of course. My parents met him several times, but I also met him once when I was 10 years old. And then he passed away in 1982. But he was a classical example of inspiring millions of people to donate their wealth in the common good, in the common interest. As Morris said, millions of hectares of land was donated by people to Vinoba's appeal. So that was a great piece of history. Before taking a pause, I would just like to say that we are living in a world which is getting more and more unequal, which is getting less and less kind, from a point where people used to say, how can I help you? We are coming to a point, why should I help you, you know? And we need to go back to the notion of how can I help you? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope that Prakash, you will have an opportunity to come to Hawaii someday. I think the spirit of aloha, of how can you help, how can I help you, it actually does live here. It's still alive and vibrant. So it may be renewing to your spirit to experience it in person. And honestly, as I travel in the world, I more often find that attitude than the opposite. It just doesn't, as Maurice was saying, it certainly doesn't get into the papers. But we do meet people who have done remarkable things for others, and they don't even really particularly acknowledge it. I mean, there are people who are starting nonprofits all the time, just because they just feel that there's such a great need that should be met. And I've never met anybody who was part of a nonprofit that really made much of a living at to speak up out of doing so. I don't think that that's ever a motive for anyone starting a nonprofit, but there are so many of them. And it's unfortunate right now that a lot of them here are suffering tremendously from the withdrawal of funds. And perhaps that will help us to see even more acutely how much they help society in general, and how much of a need we have for them, just for the sake of kindness. So who else can we open this up to today? Who else would like to say something on this idea of trusteeship? Marianne, is that you?
Yes, very totally dialogue. I love your I appreciate your response. Can you hear me now?
A little better. Yeah.
Okay. I believe that the people are good, but what we're talking about is the motivation and the spiritual embodiment of that goes along with that feeling of participation and unity that is in the theory of stewardship and the theory of the idea of me doing this for a more giving point of view, because we are all integrated. And I too see a lot of nonprofits, but I feel that they could be more grounded in the theory that we're talking about, where the unity is what we're inspired to. So the explanation on equity, everyone giving from a component of their abilities and their inspirations and their own, perhaps money, perhaps time, perhaps writing, was a really good draw for our reaction, give, or complain, but really contribute from a sense of dedication, integrating your willingness for the long term. And I feel that trustees do maintain a long-term role over society, over these decades or up and down, whether they're political or financial. So yeah, I think that was expressed in Gandhi's philosophy, and I really want to integrate that sense personally of motivation for my own involvement in a nonprofit. So good discussion on that, but I do think there's a spiritual drive within that was brought out in the discussion today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Now, one thing that Helena Blavatsky said back in the 1800s was that it's not just enough to give our money. I mean, I think that there is a lot of financial giving, but to actually be in person and give something in person of oneself. And sometimes that it is really about the kindness that Prakashji mentioned, that just to see someone on the street and just kind of like not really want to recognize them, but give them a sandwich or, you know, a $10 bill without like looking them in the eyes and, you know, greeting them and ask them if we may offer them something, for example. It's an entirely different act than just dropping a check in the mail or being in person, but not giving them like that real sense of human interaction and recognizing them as a fellow human being, not just a recipient of our generosity in the moment. Right. So I think you bring up a really good point there, Marianne. Thank you so much. It could be deeper. We could go deeper. Diana.
Thank you, Maurice. That was really helpful. And I loved Pragjis. I appreciated your comments too. One of the things that struck me that you said was ownership is a species of violence and we reduce fear beyond possessiveness. I think that's really important because ownership, as we feel we own it, and our fear of losing stops people from being giving, or that's mine, you have it, but this is mine, I can't let it go because life is uncertain and I don't know what's going to happen, but I really think that ownership as a species of violence, I think that's the word you used, I'm not quite sure, but yeah. I thought that was really powerful because if we look at what we own as we own it and we have to protect it, we're coming from a place of fear and protectiveness. If we realize we're all one, and yes, we do own things, but there's a generosity of spirit. And like you said, it's not just money, it's being present with people and giving love and caring and listening and making them real. You know, even if I don't want to give someone some money as I'm passing by, just to look at them, because most people don't even look at people, you know, and so I think that idea of ownership, of how that and that possessiveness of taking care of and fear of losing is affecting our kindness. And it, again, it's accentuated with the them over us, you know, and they're taking away from us and we're not going to have enough. So there's abundance and feeling of spiritual abundance and also possessive abundance once we open our hearts and move in that kind of circle. So I thank you. Those seem like really important to me.
What I want to know is why can't trusteeship, or it could be an indigenous version, a different name for that. Do we teach this in school? Is this in our education? We do teach private property because economics is all based on private property. That's what, if I had my own bugaboo, I'd be trying to teach trusteeship, because it means different things to different people. It's not mechanical, but if people don't even have it in their lexicon of thought, then yes, they can be, if they have that natural kindness, by all means, right? But if they get infected by this notion of absolute private property, it's like a mental infection. And then it gets reinforced all the time, right? If there's some way to combat that, it would be wonderful. And maybe there is in certain smaller indigenous populations, they have different words. They use a different language, thank God. Thank you.
Kind of wonder what it would be like to live as if we were trustees of these lives and these bodies that we have. If it maybe has to start at that very, very fundamental level.
Mm. Yeah.
And that willingness, for example, that Gandhiji would train his followers in to accept violence when they would defy an unjust law for the sake of the greater whole, did require a certain willingness to give up one's life. That's holding one's life, I think, in trusteeship. So we, I think, aren't quite there yet in terms of public school education. But even to just begin to think of holding the items that we hold, that we, have responsibility for, with a little bit lighter touch, with a little bit more sense of generosity. If we have something good, as is said in the book, The Education of Little Tree, grandmother told him, whenever you get something good, first thing to do is to share it. If we could even just cultivate that one little approach, probably would make a big, big deal of help.
Yes. Yeah, I think you really point to the heart and not, and so much, well, for example, education is usually the head. There's nothing per se wrong with it, but if it lacks the heart quality, the loving kindness, if you will, the universality of the heart, it just means so much, because when people point to themselves, as we've talked about before, they don't point, this is me. If you point to yourself, you usually point to your heart.
Indeed. Good point. Kat, I see you. It looks as though you're looking into the screen. Is it possible you have something to share with us?
I want to thank Maurice and Prakash for giving your talk. I really appreciate it. Personally, I don't feel smart enough to comment on what was just shared. I'm still absorbing a lot of this information, but I really do appreciate an opportunity to learn. So thank you so much for discussing with us.
Yeah. Kat's going to be going back to her family's native country of the Philippines, probably in a year or two, to study to be a nurse. It would be interesting to know kind of the cultural differences and whether there's more or less openness, and maybe you already know, to this idea of trusteeship, of more of a sense of shared ownership or more sharing. Do you have any sense of that?
Yeah, I believe that there's a concept called couple. Give me a sec. Oh, hi. You just gonna use the restroom? Oh, okay. Sounds good. Sorry. There's a concept of kapwa. It's like kind of similar. Let me double check. Kapwa kind of reminds me of aloha, and it also it's a Filipino core value representing a shared inner self and humanity, where the self is seen in the other. So there is an openness to and Filipinos are known very much for their hospitality and their openness and their big-heartedness.
Yes, indeed. And kindness.
Yes.
And service.
Yeah, service above all and service
Yeah.
to one another.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when you operate, even as a nurse, as I just got out of a kidney stone thing, so I so appreciate nurses, right? And I hold them in trust. You know, that they're serving me in trust. I don't know, even though I'm ignorant about what all's going on, you know, but I just really appreciate that so much. So this notion of people are holding this in trust as a trustee. You're acting as our trustee when it comes to medicine. Really, it's really good. Great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Could you put into the chat, please, Kat, that Filipino word that you used, so we might be able to look that up. Thank you. Robert Moore, an retired lifelong nurse.
Speaking of nurses.
Speaking of nurses.
Yeah. Unmute, Robert. Yeah.
Somebody put in here, who was that, about Sermon on the Mount by Jesus. You know, it's, if you look at the Sermon on the Mount, it's certainly non-possession and trusteeship way back then. So if Christianity was actually taught, and they, you know, they're a little focused on the New Testament rather than on the Old Testament all the time, that could make a difference. But I had a question, Maurice, that
Yeah.
really intriguing to me, that Dr. R was always insistent that, and it's in that pamphlet too, that for moral and intellectual development, control of speech is one of the primary requirements. So before you can even get into thinking about all the implications of trusteeship, you have to learn to control your speech. Do you understand why that's true, or is it true?
Well, I think it's true. If you're a trustee, you're always responsible for preserving something. You know, like you're on the board of trustees of the organization. So you're preserving the organization or its services. So in this case, we're preserving what's best in us, which is our voice, because it's our voice that gives rise to sharing thoughts. And you can have the greatest thoughts, but if you don't have a tonality of voice coming from a kindness or a heart quality. So, but sometimes when we want to be helpful or when we have to give talks, you talk all the time. You know what I mean? It's he writes about it as compulsive talking. And that could really negate the true spirituality, if you will, the true sharing of the spirit and evocation of something that's beautiful and refined. Sometimes saying less is better than saying more. I had to close an account at a bank that I just started because they gave me wrong information. And the manager came up to me and said, "I'm really sorry. We gave you wrong information." And I was very fine with that. And then 3 other so-called managers came up to me, and it went on and on and on. And it was all this compulsive talking. And it didn't mean anything to me. But the person who was just honest and direct, "We gave you wrong information. We're really sorry." Okay, we're all human. We all hear. So the control of speech is very, very important because it's kind of at the beginning of thought. And the way you might have kindness, but then how do you express it? And obviously, if you have the heart, it could override a lot of other defects. But anyway, that's just some thoughts.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you so much. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you about next week and a little bit beyond that too. And then maybe someone would like to prepare to give a very brief vote of thanks to Maurice after that. Next week, our topic will be greed to generosity. Ram Dass Lam, who lives here in Hawaii and was an ascetic in India for 9 or 10 years in the early part of his life, will be talking from the Ramananda ascetic tradition of Hinduism. And the next week, our topic will be compassionate ideation. And Bob Buss is going to speak to us from the nonviolent activism tradition. I think he's going to touch on Dr. Martin Luther King. The following week, when we would normally have a GEMS meeting on Saturday, the 25th, we will instead be celebrating Diwali, the Indian Festival of Lights, at Still and Moving Center. It's, I believe, at 6 p.m. And we will have an online version as well as an in-person. So everyone should be able to partake of that wonderful celebration. We enact the story of the Ramayana. It's about an hour and a half long version of a play. It's very engaging and certainly brings up a lot of moral questions and is filled with heroism. So we like to use that as our Gems from the Wisdom Traditions meeting every year. So that will be on Sunday, October 26th, Hawaii time. That will be at 6 p.m. There are online as well as in-person spaces available for you to sign up. And so is there somebody who is, I'm just going to go ahead and then just jump down a little bit to say that on November 8th, we'll get Prakash back and he's going to speak to us on a very related topic of living simply, which is very much in consonance with this idea of being a trustee, is to be able to simplify our own ways of living. Is there somebody who would like to give a vote of thanks to Maurice today for his wonderful presentation? Thank you so much, Diana.
Maurice, thank you so much. I think especially in this day and age, what you say is so important to be reminded of. And it seems like even the themes that are moving forward are about living with trusteeship, with compassion and caring and love. So I really appreciate it. It was very thorough. And I really hadn't heard that word in that way and associated with ownership and everything. And I found it really interesting. So thank you for such a comprehensive discussion. Thank you.
Thank you all for participating.
Thank you.
To Jenny, who
Thank you.
can in the corner there,
Uh-huh.
for participating. Everybody, thank you so much. It was so lovely to have
Thank
all.
you.
Aloha. Thank
Bye.
you.
Aloha, and thank you all for being such a wonderful community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to see you, Prakash. Thank you so much, Maurice.